Amen. What a beautiful, beautiful song. And what a beautiful, beautiful church. The Sunday before Labor Day crowd. I love it. This is how we know who all the serious people are. Just being for real. Y'all may be seated. Beloved, the guest of honor is not always the guest that is being honored. Today, we find our beloved Jesus not being a great dinner guest. As a matter of fact, Jesus is being a terrible, terrible dinner guest. He's walking the line between being prophetic and also being slightly passive aggressive. All right, I'm gonna just keep it real. Now, I went to seminary. I got the student loans to prove it, so I'm just gonna take some liberty and create a whole new category for how I see Jesus showing up in this story. Jesus is being prophetically passive aggressive. Prophetically passive aggressive. I mean, imagine you invited some friends over to your house, and everybody comes over for dinner, and you've just spent all day cooking a meal straight from the heart, Sister Venus. Everybody sits down for dinner, and then in front of everyone, one of your friends proposes a toast. And they say, hear ye, because that's what people say when they toast. Let me tell you a story about a dear friend of mine, and they look straight at you, who once threw a dinner party and invited everyone that they knew. And they spent all day preparing a meal that they just knew was going to be exceptional, only to serve overcooked meatloaf. Prophetically passive aggressive. I mean, that's what Jesus is doing in this text. And oh, by the way, just blink your eyes, don't raise your hand if you know someone who can be prophetically passive aggressive at times. All right, I see some blinks. I see some elbows too. Jesus may be hurting some feelings, but he knows that the people he's dining with, through the way they are living out and imposing their toxic and bad religion on the community, are harming actual people. So Jesus takes the risk of hurting some feelings in defense of those who are experiencing actual harm. And he sets his sights on the seating chart. And he says to everyone gathered, beware, the guest of honor is not always the guest that is being honored. Just because someone is in the most honorable position doesn't mean that they possess the most honorable character. And just because someone is identified as a person of interest and intrigue does not mean that they are a person of integrity and excellence. And just because someone is seated in the highest position, it does not mean that the Most High God is the one who has positioned and seated them there. Gee, I wonder if this passage has any political implications for us today. And that feels good to say. Say it again. I'm about to. And that feels good to say because on one hand, it certainly applies to presidents, but it's also humbling because it also applies to pastors and priests. Ouch. Did I mention Jesus was not being a great dinner guest? Now, even more dramatic than how Jesus exposes the issue is how Jesus proposes to fix it. He says, invite the poor, the lame, the beggars, the blind, the crippled. Now, this is enough to make the record skip, Brother Randy. This is enough to make the record skip. Because those are not just all the unpopular people. Those are also all the unclean people. Those are not just the unpopular people, but those are also the impure people. Indeed, as theologian and New Testament scholar Justo Gonzalez says, quote, Jesus suggests 4 other categories: the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Surprising as this may seem to us, it is even more surprising for the host whom Jesus is addressing. For it was precisely such people whom a good Pharisee would consider not only unworthy, but also religiously unclean. Thus, Jesus is rejecting both social and religious convention. In today's vocabulary, one could say that Jesus is telling his host to invite not the worthy, nor even the worthy poor, but the unworthy, irreligious, and sinful poor, end quote. See, you can't take Jesus nowhere. And I'd imagine the host of the party being like, how come I couldn't get the Jesus that turned water into wine? Why'd I get cranky Jesus instead of crunk Jesus? What is his problem? Beloved, what is Jesus' problem? What is Jesus' problem? I don't think it's the seating chart or the guest list. But in revealing who he would invite to the party, and in all of those people being the unclean and impure people, Jesus shows us, beloved, that his beef is with the undercurrent of purity that is damaging the community. Jesus' problem is not with the seating chart or the guest list, but Jesus' problem is with the categories of clean versus unclean, pure versus impure, in versus out, accepted versus rejected altogether. And beloved, it makes me wonder if this is one of the reasons that Jesus is sometimes depicted as leaving an area without having healed everyone there. Of course, there's Jesus' limited capacity to take into account. He was human, and he loved a good nap just like the rest of us. And by the way, people who nap live longer. Did y'all know that? Right? Somebody clapping, she knew that. So please get your naps in, just not during church. But beloved, I wonder if Jesus doesn't heal all the unclean people, all the uninvited people, all the impure people, because the bigger lesson is that there's no such thing as unclean, impure, and in God's economy, there is no such thing as uninvited. What's Jesus' problem? Purity is. And I would argue purity should be our problem too. Purity is at the root of so much of what has gotten us to the brink of fascism today. Clean, unclean, pure, impure, in, out, American, un-American, citizen, foreigner, documented, undocumented, us, them. Purity, beloved, is one of the bedrocks of fascism. And indeed, as Donald Trump seized control of the DC Police Department and deployed the National Guard and other federal agencies to terrorize and harass communities, many of which are historically black communities, you heard the same language, a pledge to, quote, rescue our nation's capital from crime, bedlam, drugged out maniacs, and homeless people, end quote. You see, beloved, coded underneath "Make America Great Again" is the fervor to make America pure again. After all, was it not those who through the 1600s and 1700s, those who believed themselves to be white, to be pure, that justified the enslavement of African peoples who were deemed to be impure? Was it not those who, believing themselves to be white and pure, decided that one drop of black blood was enough to pollute one's personhood and make them impure and unclean and thereby enslavable and unfit to have equal rights and privileges in society? Was it not those who, believing themselves to be white and free of any contamination, who would drain whole swimming pools and fill whole swimming pools with concrete rather than share them with their black neighbors? Black neighbors who, by the way, paid taxes to maintain those same swimming pools that they were barred from enjoying. Was it not those who, believing themselves to be white from the very beginning of this nation, seated themselves at the place of honor in society, ahead of everyone else, excluding generations of others from the banquet of the American dream? Beloved, the myth of purity, and specifically racial purity, is one of the bedrocks that made the enslavement of African people and the genocide of indigenous people and the subsequent birth of this nation possible. After all, if you're pure and those people over there are impure, then it doesn't really matter much what happens to them now, does it? Ooh, now let me duck, because now I feel like a bad dinner guest. But the good news, beloved, is that science, most notably the Human Genome Project, has long since definitively proven that race is not biologically real, and that someone who is categorized racially as white can have more genetic similarities with someone who is racially categorized as black than someone of their own race. Racial purity and the white supremacy that comes with it is a myth, because race itself is a myth. Now, the interesting thing about these seating charts and guest lists and obsession with purity and clean versus unclean and in versus out is that it's not just something that we practiced from the foundation of this nation, but it's a game that we still play today, even in the seemingly more mundane parts of our lives. Let me just use an I statement. Tim is a good psychologist. I'm in therapy. I'm practicing. Let me just use an I statement. I play these games all the time. I play these games on social media, these purity games. I catch myself virtue signaling all the time. Let me just repost this so they know that I'm cool and I passed the test. In conversations, beloved, sometimes I nod and smile like I know that term that you just used, even though I know I'm gonna Google it later. And no, I'm not gonna ask you, because if I ask you, then I automatically fail the test. Yes, of course, I know that organization. They do great work in the area of work that they work in. Anybody else? Just blink, just blink. It's okay, just blink, just blink. I see you out there, I'm not alone. But we play these games. I play these games. But they're losing games. Because just like racial purity doesn't exist, purity of virtue and moral purity also doesn't exist. I don't know if y'all remember, but I'm the guy, I haven't done this as much lately, but I'm the guy who reads books critiquing capitalism that I ordered from Amazon. That's crazy work. I haven't been to Target in nearly 9 months due to its abandonment of DEI, our LGBTQ siblings, and its betrayal and abandonment of black people. But in a pinch, that boycott has also pushed me to go to Walmart more times than I'd like to admit. I haven't been to Starbucks in support of my Palestinian siblings in nearly a year, but I did keep Disney, which Palestinians have also asked us to boycott, long enough to finish Andor, which in season 2 ironically portrays a people attempting to resist a genocide. And that's not a spoiler, by the way. Beloved, I've long since stopped supporting Home Depot, even before they began enabling ICE to kidnap our neighbors. But I do go to Lowe's, whose CEO, according to More Perfect Union, made 557 times more than his lowest paid employee in 2023. All right, let me just stop before I lose my job. But the point is, there is no such thing as moral purity. And you can be confident that when purity has been invited to enter, Jesus has been or will soon be invited to leave. After all, Jesus can be a really, really bad dinner guest. But beloved, if we want Jesus to stay and dine with us, then what, if not purity and hierarchy, is Jesus inviting and calling us to? Beloved, I think what Jesus calls us to is a complete reversal. I'll just put my cards on the table. I believe Jesus is calling us to a complete reversal or revolution, because the trick bags and lose-lose situations we find ourselves in go beyond our individual choices and indicate that a whole-scale revolution is what is in order. It's not just about choosing Lowe's over Home Depot, but it's a turning over of the way we do life to something better altogether, in which all of humanity flourishes, where no one wins at someone else's expense, and believing that such a world is possible. And beloved, let me tell you, that takes courage, that reversal, that revolution, because guess what? We have to let Jesus host the party. If I'm honest, again, another I statement, I'm more comfortable with Jesus being at the party and turning some water in the wine real quick than with Jesus hosting the party. Because sometimes Jesus makes some party choices that I don't like. Jesus sends out some invitations that I don't like. Jesus makes some arrangements that don't vibe with me, that I'm not feeling. Jesus throws on some music that I might not want to dance to and completely upends what I had in mind. Again, theologian Justo Gonzalez helps us. He says this, quote, "In interpreting this passage, we should not forget that for its first readers, as for Christians throughout the ages, the central act of worship was a meal. At communion, even though we prepare the table and invite people to participate, Jesus takes over. He is the host, and we are his guests. All too often, however, Christians have claimed control of the table as if it were ours and not his. We decide whose belief is sufficiently orthodox to share communion with us, who is sufficiently good and pure, who belongs to the right church. Rather than following Jesus' instructions, we seek the places of most honor." Ooh, this one really hurt me. "Sometimes signaling this with actions and vestments that make clear who is in charge. Rather than inviting those who seem most unworthy and cannot repay us, we invite the worthy, those who support the church, people like us at whose tables we might well sit later in the week. Rather than going out and compelling people to enter, we shut the doors in various ways. Yet Jesus takes over, just as he did at the home of the Pharisee, and turns our unworthy meal into a sign and a foretaste of the final heavenly banquet." End quote. Whew. Beloved, I think that's why Jesus mentions the resurrection, because that sounds like a job for resurrection power. The resurrection wasn't a do-over. The resurrection was an undoing, a complete reversal, a complete reorientation of how we imagine life itself and how we do life itself and how we treat others and even how we treat our very selves. Because think about it. Just as there are people groups who get labeled and rejected as impure, Beloved, aren't there parts of our very selves that we label and reject and don't even want to touch or go near because we think of them as impure, as unclean, and as unworthy of being in community? Beloved, Jesus' invitation is that of new life for society and for the parts of ourselves that when we step into the party, we ask to leave at the door. What parts of yourself that when you step into the party, you ask to stay and wait for you at the door? What parts of yourself that when you step even into church, you ask to wait for you at the door? In fear that we are not just a bad dinner guest, but in fear that we are bad inside to our core. But this morning, beloved, I'm reminded of the words of the late poet Andrea Gibson, who says, quote, "All day I listen to the radio of your memories. Yes, I know every secret you thought too dark to tell me, and I love you more for everything you feared might make me love you less. I love you more for everything you feared might make me love you less." If that isn't the love of Jesus, beloved, I don't know what is. And beloved, that is infinitely more beautiful than purity. And that is actually good news, because I don't know about you, but purity is exhausting. The constant jockeying for position and trying to climb and maintain that position on the seating chart is exhausting. Worrying about being on the guest list of whatever club or group we desperately want acceptance and belonging into is exhausting. Oh, but beloved, the good news this morning is that the true guest of honor, Jesus, is throwing a better banquet that we don't have to step over anyone to get into, even the parts of ourselves that we wished didn't exist. The true guest of honor, Jesus, is throwing a better banquet. Have you heard the good news of this banquet? Beloved, it's a banquet where grace is what gets you on the guest list and mercy is the main course. It's a banquet where the rhythm of love is all you need to stay on the dance floor, and where there is no front row or back row, but just an ever-widening circle of beloved community. It's a banquet where the buffet is overflowing with forgiveness, and the only ice allowed on the premises is the ice that keeps the champagne cold. Oh, it's a banquet. Oh, beloved, this is a banquet where the VIPs are peace, justice, faith, hope, and love. Beloved, have you heard the good news this morning that Jesus is throwing a better banquet? And to be sure, there are some notable exclusions. I'm going to say this and sit down. There are some notable exclusions who won't get in. I forgot to mention, there are some folks on the guest list that aren't invited. Racism is not invited. Anti-blackness is not invited. White supremacy is not invited. Patriarchy, homophobia, transphobia, white Christian nationalism, its distant cousin Zionism is not invited to the party. No wonder Jesus ends by centering the resurrection, because it's going to take some resurrection power, a power greater than ourselves, to be the bouncer at a party like that. But beloved, it's possible. These are extravagant promises, but it's possible. If we collaborate and co-labor with Jesus, it's possible. Jesus is throwing a better banquet, and the invitations have already been sent out. Will you accept one? Amen.